2, 3.
With more than 3,000 career shows playing an average of 228 gigs a year, bass player and musical director to the stars, Funkboy Bodley is one of the hardest working musicians in the business today. In his debut book, Am I Famous Yet? Memoir of a Working Class Rock Star, Ivan chronicles his life on the road, performing with everyone from Sting and Elvis Costello to Bo Diddley and Wynonna Judd, including 50 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees. On today's episode, Bodley talks about his first performance at his high school talent show, and how that moment came full circle 28 years later when he performed on stage with Sting. You'll also hear about the perils of being a substitute musician for a Broadway show, how he and his bandmates witnessed the ancient practice of payola carried out live on stage with the self-proclaimed king of rock and soul. With a career that has taken him to more than 29 countries, playing to audiences of up to 82,000 people, in performance settings ranging from jazz duos to 150-member symphony orchestras, it's no wonder that Ivan Funkboy Bodley truly is a working-class rock star. I'm Charles Urich, and this is Life in the Grooves. We invite you to visit our website at lifeinthegrooves.com, where you can subscribe, listen to your favorite episodes, or follow us on your favorite podcast app. And be sure to check out our new YouTube channel at Life in the Grooves Podcast. And now, here is my conversation with Ivan Bodley. So congratulations on the book. I know that you've had experience writing press releases and liner notes from your early days when you were working at the record label, but how different was it to write a book as opposed to writing music?
Well, what you're saying is exactly right. I kind of got my start in the music business on the industry side, and I was doing exactly as you say. I was writing album liner notes. I was writing press releases and biographies for the acts that we promoted on Epic Records. Epic Portrait and CBS Associated Records was the label I worked for. And when I got there in New York, they were farming out all of the press writing, the press releases and the biographies. They were farming them out to freelance writers. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I'd always fancied myself a writer or if I'd just been doing it through school or whatnot, but I was like, I can do that, and I started doing that and saving them some money, but also keeping it in-house and doing it myself, which I enjoyed because that's the time when you got to really interact with the artists and sort of reinforce their message that they were trying to get out. That's the opportunity you have with a press release is like, what are we selling? How are we selling it? What image are we putting forward? What's the recording about? And it became an object in extolling virtue is what I called it, because I had to figure out, there's some recordings, some sound recordings you hear you might not necessarily like, but right. I had to figure out who did like this record. Somebody likes it. It might only be the lead singer's mother, but somebody likes this record, and I had to figure out sort of why and extol that virtue to the general public in something that was going to go out as a press release or a biography. And then sort of being inside the label, the workings of the machinery there, then so you get the opportunity to sort of write some liner notes to some releases. I guess the most prominent one I did was for Stanley Clarke's album called If This Bass Could Only Talk, which came out in about 1988 on Portrait Records. Mm-hmm. And Stanley has always thought of me as much of a prose writer as a musician. I was a student of his at the time. So he considers me a writer even more than he considers me a musician, or as equal parts, I should say. So I don't know. It was kind of always a parallel sort of thing for me. Writing felt natural to me. Writing prose and writing music and writing arrangements also feels natural to me. So it's kind of two halves of the same brain, or maybe, the same half of the same brain. I'm not sure which, but it's easy for me.
You also write in the book that every memoir you've ever read always starts out with this long biographical chapter, and I believe you're quoted as saying, "So what? So what's the big deal? When do we get to the good stuff?" So let's get to the good stuff. What I really like about the book was that you took a non-linear approach, and I was wondering if this was something that was intentional, or did you have other ideas as to how to arrange all of these stories?
No, that was something that was a very deliberate choice that I made based on having read so many different, biographies. You get books and it's by somebody you like and admire and you know their work and you want to find out sort of the inner workings of how they came up with X, Y, or Z. And they always start, well, where I went to elementary school here, and then I went to junior high school here, and then I went to high school here. And it's fascinating stuff, and it's necessary to know sort of who they are and where they came from. But it always seemed like you got to about page 100 before you get to the sentence where it says, and then we started our first band. And that's the information that you wanted to hear, yes, I want to know where you came from and the coal mining town you grew up in and all that kind of stuff. But it always seems laborious to me to get to the stuff that's sort of immediately interesting. So I made a conscious choice to I do have a bunch of that information, but it's kind of like broken up into different chunks and sort of sprinkled throughout. And as it relates to specific stories that I've had with things on the road, sort of like that'll remind me of this. And then, oh, by the way, this all started when I, went to high school in a small town in Tennessee and learned to play, etc. As I was creating this thing, I had a few friends of mine that I was sort of handed out pages to as like beta readers to sort of get some feedback to see how they were, I was registering with them. And more than one of them told me maybe you need to think about making this more linear. So I really had to sort of put some thought to it to decide, do I really want to do that? Or am I making a conscious choice, a deliberate choice to make it nonlinear? And in the end, as you see, I decided to stick with the nonlinear approach because I found it more interesting.
And you do a great job of getting the reader excited in the first few chapters, highlighting these great experiences playing with these legendary artists. And then once you've pulled us in as a reader, you're able to step back and reveal more about yourself and the early years. What are some of the moments that stand out for you when you were first starting out?
One of my favorite stories in the book is somewhere early on, I talk about the very first high school talent show I ever played. And this was at an all-boys preparatory school in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I had the distinct sense that the entire student body actively hated me as a human being. That may only be slightly exaggerated, but only slightly. High school was a very tough time for me developmentally and just on a lot of different levels. I'm not crying the blues. It just, a lot of people have lived through much worse than I have. But it was a tough period. So playing this high school talent show, I was playing with a group of like-minded high school musicians, and we were playing cover songs of the day, which at that time were things like the Rolling Stones and Rush and Tommy Two-Tone, and kind of most importantly, the Police. We sound remarkably good for a high school band, I have to say. You can hear us sort of making rookie mistakes, but still sort of remarkably cohesive given the fact that I'd probably only been playing bass about 6 months of my life at that point. But what happens is this gymnasium full of people who actively loathe and despise me as a human being explode into applause. Like there's this giant ovation of just complete adoration that comes at you, which is 180 degrees antithetical to anything I'd ever experienced in that institution, So I'm like, what is this sudden acceptance, and can I replicate this at any point in my life and carry it forward? It kind of set me on the path to sort of thinking about, well, maybe being a musician is something that people will admire, and will accept you for. So it was the kind of thing that it's really set me on the path towards trying to figure out how to one day do that. Because I didn't pick up a bass till I was a senior in high school, I was in no kind of shape to like go immediately to music school. My college experience started out as a biomedical engineering student for 2 years, and then I decided to transfer to the psychology department. So I have a psych degree. That's my undergrad degree, is in psychology.
Wow.
I didn't get a music degree until, a few years later, like after I'd already cycled through the entire music business and the record company and all that and quit. And went off on my own to be a musician. Then I decided, all right, if I'm going to try to do this as a career, I really need to kind of get it together and go to music school and sort of figure out what I'm doing.
So you discovered in the process that it's never too late once you find what you're really passionate about.
Absolutely. And going to music school sort of, a little bit later in life, I was probably 26, 27 when I was there, and also paying for it on your own as opposed to having your parents pay for your education kind of stuff, it makes for a very different type of experience. I really knew that I wanted to be there for myself. I knew what I needed. I knew what I was trying to get out of it. And I had a very different level of dedication than the average, 17-year-old fresh out of high school going to Berklee College of Music. But just to add on to the whole sort of non-linear, cyclical nature of the book narrative, towards the end, I tell a story about playing the first Obama inauguration with Sam Moore from Sam and Dave, whom I was music director for. And Sam was doing this all-star celebrity bash in Washington, D.C., and he had two special guests that were sitting in with him that night. One of them was named Elvis Costello, and the other one was named Sting. So we knew Sting was going to play Every Breath You Take with us with the band, and then we were told he was going to do the song Message in a Bottle, but he was going to do it just a solo guitar and voice version like he'd done kind of famously on the Secret Policeman's Other Ball in 1981. Right. Is a recording that I grew up knowing and loving. So as we were rehearsing with him on stage, I said, "You're going to do Message too, right?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm going to do that." And I said, "Do you want us to back you up?" He's like, "Do you know it?" I said, "It's in C sharp, right?" He's like, "Yeah." So I went from the very first time I was ever on a stage playing music in front of people, playing Message in a Bottle. Fast forward, I don't know exactly what it was, 27 years or something, and suddenly I'm playing it on stage with Sting. And it was just this mind-blowing. It was all I could do to just kind of like stay focused and stay in my body and do my job. But, like the kid inside you is just kind of like, I cannot believe this is happening. And I never could have conceived it. Standing in a high school gymnasium, you cannot imagine that one day you're going to play this with the guy who wrote it,
Well, I always say that there are no coincidences, and I do believe that the universe lays out a path for us. We may not see it at the time, in the moment, but it is quite amazing when it does happen.
Yeah, no, I believe what you're saying 100%. I think that, I extend that even to when people say, how did you decide to play bass specifically? I think your instrument chooses you. I don't think you choose the instrument. Like, it sort of fits your character. Mm-hmm. But even so, like, even knowing that, bass fits my character, and that knowing in 1982 I loved the Police as everybody else did, it takes a whole lot of things that have to go exactly right to then perform that song with Sting. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a whole lot of things have to be really, lucky. In addition to everything else, the education that you had to get and the practice that you had to do and all that kind of stuff, the road miles,
Yeah, and in addition to all of that experience and all those road miles, another one of your skills is being a music director for a number of soul acts as well as other performers.
Right.
And I was wondering, from your perspective, if you see the bass as the foundational instrument, especially when you're working with a band as music director.
100%. It's absolutely, it is the foundation. It is the bass, B-A-S-E, as well as the B-A-S-S, the lowest frequency. And just to add another one of a quote from our buddy Sting, I believe he's the guy who said, the chord isn't defined until I play a bass note and then define what the chord quality is. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you have a C and an E and a G in your right hand of the piano, if Sting then plays an F sharp in the bass, suddenly we have a very different chord voicing than just a C major triad. The bass kind of defines what the harmony is and the function of the harmony within the music. That's getting a little theoretical, but 100%, I think it is the foundation in many ways. And then when I'm conducting from the bass chair, if I'm leading the band or something, I'm very much conscious of the fact that the bass, our job is to kind of play the root note on the downbeat. Like we have to kind of be the first one in the door, rhythmically and harmonically. The drums can kind of keep going in 4/4 time and pretty much, make an evening of it, whether they actually know the material or not. I have to know the material. I have to know the chord changes. I have to know the harmonic rhythms. I have to know, and when I'm conducting, I kind of have to know everybody else's parts in the band, better than them so that I can cue them when to come in and out, and also have my own instrument enough on autopilot that I can operate on the second level where I'm talking to them, I'm singing my parts, I'm playing my parts, sort of like walking and patting yourself on the head and rubbing your stomach all at the same time.
And then one day, one magic day, he passed my way. And as we spoke of many things, fools and kings, this he said to me, the greatest thing you will ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. Na 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 na.
From the album Beauty is Only Knee Deep, that is the music of Ivan Funkboy Bodley with a special guest performance by Living Colour's Corey Glover with Nature Boy. Now, there's also some other exceptional musicians on this recording, and I was wondering if you could share with us some of the history behind this record.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's going way, way back. That was done in 1994. That was kind of really like the first thing I did after I graduated Berklee College of Music. So Julian Coriel and Peter Adams, the keyboard player, and Adrian Harpum, the drummer, those were all classmates of mine from Berklee. The saxophone player on that side, on that session, is a guy named Deji Coker, who I met in New York, and I was doing, jazz gigs with in New York. The percussionist is the late, great Rafael Cruz, who I knew back from my time in New Orleans, back when I was first learning how to play. And Rafael is a recording legend. If you look at his page of credits, it's just as long as your arm. And then Corey I knew from working with him when I was at Epic Records. I was the publicist for Living Colour for their first album when that came out. So as with so many projects, at the time, you make the phone calls to the people that you know, who are your friends, who will come over and play and sing on things, and they did. And I've heard that record. I hadn't heard it in a long time, but I just heard it recently. I'm like, that kind of holds up.
I do want to go back to the book for a minute, and because you play such a diverse range of gigs, I'd really love for you to talk about the chapter Weddings, Funerals, and Bar Mitzvahs. I couldn't stop laughing when I was reading about the time that you played for a funeral directors convention.
That happened, that was in Baltimore. It was a gig with the Shirelles. We were on the same bill with the Drifters, and we didn't know what it was rolling up to it. It's just a gig. It was at the Baltimore Convention Center, and it said NFDA convention. We're like, NFDA, okay, what does that stand for? And we saw a sign that said National Funeral Directors Association Convention. We're like, oh boy, now we knew where we really were. And there was a convention floor there with booths, and they were selling embalming equipment and all this stuff. And it was like very macabre, but also, it's their business. So it was very sort of matter of fact. And we were playing, the closing night banquet. So this is giant banquet hall, probably 1,000 people seated at tables. And they had a huge production rig, a big stage. They had 3 or 4 camera video shoot. We actually walked out with a video of the night, lighting, big sound, big rig, and these folks, who are very sort of somber and businesslike in their day-to-day life, when they're among themselves and away from the public and away from civilians, these people need to cut loose. They were yelling and screaming and doing everything but hanging from the chandeliers and having a tremendous time. It was a great gig. It was a lot of fun, but like you just really couldn't imagine what to expect walking into a situation like that. Like we're playing for 1,000 morticians. Seriously, it was great. It was a great night.
Well, it's funny you should mention morticians, because another great artist that you've worked with is the self-proclaimed king of rock and soul, Dr. Solomon Burke. And I remember reading in Peter Goralnick's book, Sweet Soul Music, that he was a licensed mortician. In fact, he had several businesses.
That's right.
And there's one memorable experience that you describe in the book. It was an event that you and your bandmates witnessed on stage with Dr. Burke and the great DJ, Hal Jackson.
Yeah, we loved Solomon, King Solomon Burke, the king of rock and soul. He was using the Uptown Horns Review band as his pickup band of choice, kind of through the mid to late 90s. Kind of anytime he was in the New York area, he would call Crispin CO and the Uptown Horns to come back him up. So we played behind him at BAM out of Metro Tech. We played behind him at Lincoln Center, Avery Fisher Hall. We played at JVC Jazz Festival with him. We played Saratoga. I think it was the Newport Jazz Festival, Saratoga, for like about 15,000 of our closest friends. We played Tramps with him. We did a lot of gigs with him. It's just an astounding character, just an interesting, fascinating guy in all respects. So he always had with him, he had 21 children. He had 14 daughters and 7 sons.
Wow.
And he very typically had at least 1 or 2 of them with him on the road to act as a valet, an aide de camp, whatever, what have you, because his stage setup was on his technical rider. There had to be a throne, literally a throne, front and center, because he was a very large man. We met him, he was about 475 pounds. So he would come out on stage, sit upon his throne. He also had 2 buckets of 24 long stem roses with the thorns removed on the rider, so that he would hand them out to ladies in the front row as part of his shtick as the night would go on. And then his son or a valet or aide de camp or whoever it was would periodically mop his brow as necessary. So one of these particular gigs, Hal Jackson, who's like the dean of rhythm and blues radio in New York City for many years, decades. Yeah. Right. He was the MC on the gig. So he introduced Solomon and brought him on stage. And as he was walking off, Solomon, grabbed his hand and sort of brought him back to center stage and gave a very large and sort of impassioned speech about how great Hal was and how much he'd always enjoyed his programming and how important Hal had been in playing Solomon's record over the course of his entire career since the 50s. And he leaned over to his son and he whispered something in his ear. So his son turned his back to the audience, which means he was facing the band. So we watched him pull an envelope out of his pocket and count out 5 crisp, brand new $100 bills. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Wads them up, folds them up, and sort of palms them to his father as his father is talking about the great Hal Jackson on stage in front of an audience of thousands of people.
Wow.
And he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, Hal Jackson," and he shakes Hal's hand, and he gives him, the maitre d', the happy handshake. Mm-hmm. Because it was got the money in his hand. Hal doesn't know this is happening. He looks down and he sees the money and he jumps. He reacts. He's like, no, and he tries to give it back. And Solomon assures him, this is all done without words. Just pats him on the palms, like, no, that's for you. Thank you so much. And we just watched we watched in real time, the ancient practice of payola happening and before our eyes. It never ever went away, even after it had been sort of prosecuted and debunked. And I know that from working inside the major label. It just sort of took other forms because disc jockeys were hugely influential and could make or break careers. So Solomon was still working and still recording and still needed Mr. Jackson's services, and also was thanking him for years and years of support. And we kind of didn't believe it, but we saw it happen.
Oh, Sookie, 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 take a look at that cookie now. Oh, Sookie, 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 take a look at that cookie now.
You're listening to more great music from Ivan Funkboy Bodley with Look at That Cookie. This tune is from a collection of tracks featured on his new label, Color Red Music, and this is a curated platform that you can find online at color-red.com. There's a chapter in the book titled, What's Your Worst Nightmare?, which tells the story about your experience performing in the hit Broadway show, Hedwig and the Angry Inch. Now, had you been with the show for a period of time?
Oh, yeah. No, I was subbing, and that was my first performance.
That was your first performance? Wow.
First performance, yeah. And subbing on a Broadway show, or any show really, it's like an exercise in terror. You basically have to wear a diaper when you're doing it because there's no rehearsal. There's just, you have one shot to sort of get it right. Actually, with Hedwig, there was a put-in rehearsal, but it wasn't for me. It was for another one of the actors, but I got to sort of enjoy the benefits of it. Mm-hmm. So I actually did get to sort of, run the show once before having an audience. Mm-hmm. But generally, on a Broadway situation, you have one shot to get it right, and if you don't get it right, we shan't work together again. You won't be rehired. So I knew my choreography. I knew my parts. I knew, the Hedwig band was in costume, in makeup, on stage. We had lines. We had choreo. I had things I actually had to sing. I knew all my vocal parts. And at the end of the show, as I went into in the book, my instructions were to put the bass down, walk up to the front of the stage with the rest of the cast, take a bow, and go home. That was the last thing I had to do at the end of the show. When we got to that point of the show, I was wearing a necklace that had a little pendant on a metal chain that had somehow gotten wrapped around a badge that was on this leather jacket on my costume, and it physically locked the bass to my body. So I could not get it off, and I started trying to pull the strap off of the strap button, and basically what I was doing is I was pulling it down. I was making a tighter and tighter knot that included my hair, the necklace, the strap. It was not going anywhere, and this was taking place in front of 1,000 of my closest friends. And it probably only took 20 seconds or so, but it seemed like an eternity on stage. And the entire cast is kind of looking at me like, what are you doing? The music director finally just said, why don't you just bring the bass? Just come on over. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. So I walked over, but the bass is hardwired to the stage. So I'm still tethered to the rig. So even though I can now do the bow, I can't get off stage still. I still haven't figured out how to get physically off of the stage. But the music director sort of took mercy upon my soul, and he just reached over and he unplugged the bass and threw the cable. So I was like, oh, thanks. It never occurred to me, because I was trying to follow the instructions I was given. I wasn't prepared to improvise to actually get off of the stage. But
Unbelievable.
It just occurred to me that was the kind of thing that would sort of be, equivalent to going to school and realize you forgot to wear clothes, or something like that. You couldn't be more publicly made a spectacle of if you tried, and I survived. I was fine.
So I
worked out.
take it you did work again on Broadway after that.
On that show, they had me back. They kind of laughed about it. We had a little huddle in the wings after we got off stage, kind of part of that show, because the band was really part of it with John Cameron Mitchell. And John Cameron Mitchell looked at me and said, "Now that's rock and roll." I was like, "Yeah, man."
That is just priceless.
A muffalata. A muffalata.
That is the trio of James Dower on keyboards, Joe Goretti on drums, and my guest today, Ivan Funkboy Bodley on bass, with a track named after the classic New Orleans sandwich, that is Muffalata. Now, this is part of your catalog that's currently being distributed and licensed through your new association with Color Red Music. Tell me how this all came about.
Well, as you say, there are no coincidences, and everything happens for a reason. So my guy at Color Red Music is my friend Lee Popa. And Lee Popa I met when he was in a band in 1988 on Epic Records, where I was an employee. I was his publicist. He had a band out of Chicago, a rock band called the Slammin' Watusies. And I met him then, and his manager, Dave Fry, went on to become Cheap Trick's manager, and Lee went on to mix front of house for Living Color and Cheap Trick and the Rolling Stones and everybody else on the face of the earth. So when life circled back around to the quarantine, everything locked down, Lee had gotten this job with Color Red Music, which is founded by Eddie Roberts, who's the guitar player with the new Master Sounds, if you know them. And they've been putting out, just tremendous volumes of music and very artist-friendly label. It's a very creative place. And I was putting out recordings that I was making in quarantine, sort of, by file sharing with all my friends who were similarly locked down, and, sort of posting these things on Facebook and Instagram and whatnot. And Lee was like, "I wonder why I didn't think of you earlier for Color Red. Like, I had a whole catalog full of material that they were just theirs for the taking. And they have a whole music licensing division, which is something that's potentially an income stream and very important to me, sort of like having my material available not only to the public to purchase, but also available to, film music coordinators, television music coordinators, libraries, that kind of stuff. So anybody can now
License the music.
Exactly. They can license the music, and that stuff has been sitting on my hard drive, some of it for 12, 13 years now, doing nothing, gathering dust. So now it's available for, music supervisors et al., and I'm very excited about it. And Lee's done me just a great kindness by being a long-term friend and also now my label liaison at Color Red.
Now, one of the tracks that you first released on Color Red is a tune called Crab Walk, which we featured at the top of the show. And you've got some really great people on this recording. You want to tell us about the band personnel?
I do indeed. What I found during the lockdown period was that, all of my musician friends were in a similar state of not being able to work, not being able to travel, not being able to record. So the first one that got released on Color Red is a song called Crab Walk. And I started that one with my drummer friend Kenny Soul over here in Queens. We both live in Queens. And I think that one we probably played together, just he and I, in his basement. He's got a recording rig down there, because I think that was right before the quarantine hit. And Kenny was the drummer in the band Dag that was on Columbia in the 90s, and the band Nantucket that was a big, 70s Southern rock stalwart back in the day. And also I got Kenny to play with us for the last few years of the Sam Moore band. So I've literally dragged him around the planet with me. So we created this rhythm bed And then I started writing, chords and melodies to go with that, and I started asking sort of my friends if they could chime in. So my friend James Dower plays keyboards on it. He's up in Massachusetts. My friend Doug Hendricks, who is the percussionist on the Broadway show In the Heights, he chimed in a brilliant percussion parts, I should say. He gave me about 5 or 6 tracks. Crispin Seo is the leader of the Uptown Horns, is the gentleman who played, right? Crispin played the alto solo on James Brown's Living in America. He's a bona fide rock star. He played saxophone, played 3 or 4 saxophones on it, as a matter of fact. And then finally, Moses Moe from the band Mother's Finest was available, who I had met through Kenny and done some work for and done some recording for, was available to play on guitar. And Moses was one of those guys. I remember seeing him with Mother's Finest in the 70s opening for the Atlanta Rhythm section down in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And this was it was before I think I even had ever picked up an instrument, and sort of might have had vague aspirations to be a musician. But when I saw Mother's Finest on stage, I said, I don't know what that is, but whatever that is, I want to do that. And Moses was standing on stage. He was the guitar player, the brilliant guitar player with Mother's Finest. So again, to work with him now, many years later, is one of these full circle sort of moments for me. And of course, he played brilliantly too. It's just, the track's just a ton of fun all the way around.
Yeah, it's exceptional work with exceptional musicians. I'd like to close on having you talk about what I believe is the essence of your book. There's a chapter titled, What is a Rock Star? And it's a term, as you describe it, that is too casually thrown around in a number of professions. You can be labeled a rock star plumber, a rock star scientist. So from your perspective, I'd like to get your take on 3 things that you explore in the book. And they are, what is fame? What is rock stardom? And how do you define career success?
Yeah, I've had to do a lot of thought about it because, I've sort of been moving in those circles my entire career, and you have to sort of figure out what fame is and what stardom is and what success is and how it relates to, you or specifically me personally, and if I'm accepting what I'm doing is successful in any way, shape, or form, So, the as you say, the term rock star has kind of become a general adjective that can be put in front of anything that doesn't necessarily mean anything other than that person is really good at, or they're exceptionally good at whatever that thing is, So on the one hand, a rock star would sort of imply that you're very skilled at your craft, And on the other hand, you sort of have to break that down and say, what is the stardom? Is fame and fortune are constantly used together, but they're 2 very separate things. You can be very famous or infamous and everybody knows who you are and not have made a penny doing anything, remotely creative or that relating to what you're famous for. And subsequently, you can also be, quite financially rewarded for things that nobody knows anything about. I wouldn't say a banker would necessarily be well known, so they're not famous, but they're fortunate. They have that going for them. So it's kind of an amalgam, and you sort of have to find out where your place is within it, because on top of sort of being good at what you do and having the skill set to be successful, then you also have to have luck on your side. Like the market has to be ready for what you're selling, and it's not always the case. So sort of so many things. And again, I learned this sort of from working inside the record company. So many things have to go right to make a hit record, or make somebody a star. It's not just having a great recording, because there are a lot of great recordings that came out that never heard by anybody, because it's a timing thing. It's like the market has to be ready for it. The fans have to be ready for it. It has to sort of hit the popular conscience in just the right way. And on top of that, then once it does, you have to have a complete marketing arm of a major corporation behind you to then reinforce that and get the distribution to, get it out to the people where they can actually hear it and or purchase it and sort of become successful that way. So knowing that all these things have to sort of go together and everything has to go right to sort of become a star, you have to then decide, is that the specific aspect of it that is the reward, the sole reward that you're looking for as a career musician? And for me, clearly the answer is no, that's not the only thing. I don't mind if somebody's heard something that I've played on or seen something that I've done and they're enthusiastic about it or they love it. But that's not the sole reason that I do it. Clearly I enjoy playing the bass. That's just something I love doing. I like traveling. I like playing all different types of music with all different types of people. And the fact that I can then also make a living at it is just like an extra bonus. And I think there's a whole career path that's sort of like what I call myself is a working class rock star, because I work for a living. I hump my own amps. I'm driving the van. I'm driving the bus. I'm writing the arrangements. I'm doing all the stuff myself. But I've kept my rent paid, and I haven't had a day job since 1995. So that speaks to some level of accomplishment.
Yeah, and at the core of it, musicians just love to play, and in theory, you would play for free, although that's usually never the case for a professional like yourself.
I agree with that, and I think the joke that we often tell among ourselves is that we do the gig for free. What we get paid for is the logistics. We get paid for the travel. That's the stuff that really doesn't feel like a lot of fun. If you're on a 14-hour flight to Tokyo to do 2 gigs and turn around and come right back, you're not going to have any tailbone left by the time you get back. That's what you're getting paid for. The gig is just pure joy. If you're playing Soul Man on stage with Sam Moore, there's not. I would do that for free any day of the week. Don't tell his manager that.
The book is Am I Famous Yet? Memoir of a Working Class Rock Star. Ivan, where can listeners go to pick up a copy?
Well, it's available on Amazon.com, of course, and you can find all sorts of purchasing options at my website, which is www.funkboy.net. If you need an autographed copy, I'll be happy to give you that, and it's got links to the Amazon thing as well if you want to just do it that way. They got Kindle, paperback, and there's going to be a hardback edition coming out very soon on Amazon as well.
Well, this has been great fun. I'm sure we could spend many more hours talking about many more experiences. I really enjoyed reading the book. It was a very entertaining read. Ivan, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your story.
Man, thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
My thanks to Ivan Bodley for sharing his amazing musical journey with us. You can check out all of Ivan's music on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, and also at Color Red Music. And be sure to subscribe to our show by visiting our website at lifeinthegrooves.com or lifeinthegroovespodcast.com. Life in the Grooves is produced by Tour de Force Entertainment Group. If you like what you've heard, please take a moment to share, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast app. I'm Charles Urich. Thanks for listening.